Oh,
That's
hey,
great.
Chris. Okay, well, I will get started with an introduction and then Max will read for us and we'll get started with the discussion and maybe keep in mind which stories you want to talk about. If there's like a specific story you want to bring up, ask Max about or chat amongst ourselves. So I will kick it off with our official introduction. And then at the end of the chat, if I look like I'm about to forget, please remind me not to forget to announce our next book. So we are recording this conversation on StreamYard, and it's also being streamed to Instagram, and will be posted later in Substack. Welcome to the Rooted Book Club. I'm Lauren Rhodes, founder of Rooted Magazine, where our mission is to tell stories of place from the people who call Mississippi home. The book club is an extension of this mission, where we celebrate writers with a connection to the South and books that explore issues of place and home. I'd like to thank our sponsor, Red Squared, who produces these discussions. Red Squared is an award-winning Black-owned video and film production company based in Jackson. They bring stories to life through documentaries, commercials, and live event coverage with a deep commitment to Mississippi's culture, history, and community. And you can learn more about them at redsquared.co. Tonight, Max Hipp is joining us to talk about his wonderfully dark collection of stories, What Doesn't Kill You Opens Your Heart. Max is a teacher, writer, and musician from Oxford, Mississippi. He plays in a number of bands, including the E-Meters, and he teaches literature and creative writing at the University of Mississippi. What Doesn't Kill You Opens Your Heart is Max's first book. And I love this collection. I've read it twice now. I'm so glad we get to talk about it tonight. So welcome, Max. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. This is great. I'm excited.
Yeah, well, would you mind starting us off with a reading just to reorient us in this book?
Yeah, no problem at all. I'm thinking I'll read from Blood and Stars, which is the second story in the collection, and I'll just read for 5 minutes or so, something like that. If that works.
Perfect. That's great.
Okay. Billy and Vonda eat dinner and stop at Itchy's, where college girls are dancing to a Tom Petty cover band while huddled boys buy whiskeys and watch. Billy notices they let the ice melt and drink it watered down. Sometimes they forget their drinks entirely, like the money and the dancing will never end. When it gets too loud to sit by the bar, they switch to a table at the back of the room. Vonda peels the label off her bottle and smooths it back sideways with her thumb. She's in a black blouse and a jeans skirt that stops just above her knees. Even in her checkout lane at Big Star in a faded blue t-shirt with a name tag, she was like a neon arrow beside a dark highway. Billy realized he'd been in a darkness. He asked her out right there, with a line of buggies behind him. Tell me the worst thing about you, she says, still wearing the kind smile. Her silver pendant swings as she repositions herself on the stool. Might as well start with it. Billy rocks back. He tells himself she isn't asking about the slivers of moon across his knuckles. She isn't asking about the angry line down the inside of his wrist from when drunk ass Hopkins hit him head on when the deputies placed a white bag over Hopkins's daughter without zipping it. She isn't asking about any of that, so there's no need to sink this date with it. Right now, the worst thing right now is I need to make more money. He needs a whiskey too, but senses somehow Vonda wouldn't like that. Her creamy eyeshadow makes him wish he was the kind of guy who could stop after 2 beers without giving it another thought. Shit, she says, I've been letting you pay for everything. He shakes his head. My restaurant gig pays okay. It's just hard to find work around here that's not in a restaurant or Walmart. If I didn't live with Mom, I don't know where I'd be. And if that's your worst, you're doing good. Beer lights glitter in her eyes. Your luck's going to change. They chink bottles to luck. She brushes some specks off her sleeve. At her house, Billy sat with her mother and Emily, Vonda's 3-year-old daughter, across from a flat screen showing the Christian Broadcasting Network until she came out of the bathroom. Your turn, he says. Tell me the worst about you. Emily's daddy, my ex. She takes a long swig. He wanted to take his childhood out on me. Billy's own childhood unrolls in his mind like a rug full of dog hair and cigarette butts. By the time he was 5, he wished he was grown. I'm sorry to hear it. That feels like a whole different life. almost like the bad times happen to another person. Vonda glances at one of the muted screens over the bar. Other days, though, I worry maybe nothing changes much. The kitchen jobs blur together in Billy's memory. The buckets of slop no one wants, the plates banging against the plastic until the food slides off. It's funny how the past gets like that. You get further from it and it's different. Only it doesn't really change, just seems to, because you've changed. She squints at him. I like the way you think. He nearly coughs out beer. You might be the first person who's ever said that. The band takes a break. The college students clear the room to smoke cigarettes on the balcony. Seeing college kids have fun always makes him feel like he's missed something. He had a baseball scholarship lined up before the wreck, a free ride. Pushing 30 now in the town where he grew up, he tries not to hate them as they cross the dance floor with fresh drinks, the way they seem to own the world. Vonda cradles her chin, elbows propped on the table, eyebrows raised like she can't wait to give him a present. Sitting with her is so much nicer than the empty bottles and paper plates all over his rented apartment, the roaches scuttling across the counter when he flips on the kitchen light. I haven't been out much since I've had Emily, she says. Just working and going home and hanging out with mom and baby girl most weekends. I haven't missed this. A drunk boy in a too big suit falls off a stool and lands flat on his back laughing. His friends gather around to help him up. She touches Billy's arm. Not that I'm not having a good time. I know what you mean, he says. He finishes his beer. When they arrived at Itchy's, she said she had time for just one drink. He chews his tongue, fixates on another, but figures it's best that he doesn't get it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
For some reason, ever since the first time I read this, the image of his childhood unrolling like a rug full of dog hair has like stuck in my memory. You just have so many, I don't know, unique images and analogies throughout the book. So, is that something that comes in the editing phase, or?
It's actually pared down in the editing phase. I'll throw a bunch of those out there and see if any of it works. And sometimes mostly they do not. And some of the advices always cut all that, but sometimes you just like, well, if it works, it works. If it's a good image and goes with the whole story overall, I say keep it. Mm-hmm. And if it's something that feels kind of fresh to you, at least,
Yeah. And another thing that Shira, who's a rated editor with me, she pointed out, like, there's so many good place names in this, and Itchy's for the name of the bar. I think Shira said Wanda Beef was one of her favorites. You can confirm in the chat. These are not real places, right? Or
no, they're renamed places. Yeah,
okay.
those two are renamed. There are real place names in there too, but hopefully they're blended in well enough that you can't tell.
Well, I like the North Park Mall reference. And there's a I think there's a reference to like Canton Road or a lot of Oxford Square. So yeah, how do you decide like how to pick if you're going to disguise the place name or come up with a new name?
I kind of took that story by story, and sometimes it comes down to, well, do I want that name in the book? That's if it's, and sometimes or do I want to rename it? And sometimes if it's a place that means that I think brings some meaning to it somehow, even if it's like a kind of almost like the after, I don't know, this is not a good term, the after image of like the meaning or something. If it means kind of something to me that I think works with character and all that, I will keep it. But if I can come up with something better, then I will a lot of times. Especially if it's a place it's a bar that I'm thinking of a certain location, but I don't like the name that much, I'll change it.
But you're always like picturing a real place.
A lot of the times, yeah. I found that I am doing that, and but I think even that, even when if you're picturing a real place from memory, even that is kind of a fiction in that your memory changes things.
Yep.
You'll go back and it will not be the time changes things. So it's you're kind of fixing something in place that maybe was never quite there in the way you're describing it, but get it close to how you have it in your memory. I think that's good.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've got some comments. I'll just read Grace Ann because it's short. Old Canton was such a treat. Driven down that road every day for 25 years or so. I love when I like recognize places, and even if they're disguised places, and you can kind of like still tell the details. Elise Smith says, "Who boy, it's hard to pick just one story to ask about. They're all so powerful, dark, and difficult, with characters that are totally memorable. My heart felt wrung out the end of each story. I felt the same way. So here's a general question. Are your characters based to a certain extent on people you've encountered along the way, or do you create them out of whole cloth ex nihilo?" I might have pronounced that last word wrong. Sorry, Elise.
Yeah. Wow. So
Can you tell she's a professor? She always has
I
amazing
could not tell
questions.
that actually. I did not. I just she could be throwing out. I can't pronounce that either. She could be throwing that out and not be a professor. But the question was, so basically, where the character's coming from. Do I've encountered them? Some of them, yeah, and some of them I'm creating composites, and sometimes it's someone I just made up, and so it's sort of a mix of all that. I think, yeah, it's not. If on one side you've got stuff that's been there that you completely made up, and on the other end of the spectrum, it's stuff that everything that happened is somewhere. I think it's somewhere in the middle and towards made all up.
That's fair. Alex says, I was really interested in the gender relations in this collection of stories. You've got some really interesting female characters, but none of them are really the protagonists. Were you intentionally making a statement about heterosexual relationships with the collection, or is that just something that emerged? P.S. Is the sushi place in the titular story Jinsei?
I'll I'll answer the last question first. No, we're going back to the original sushi place in Oxford, which was Two Stick. That's the original sushi place in Oxford.
Wow.
Yeah, so before Jinsai, there was Two Stick, and so I I do have. There's one story with a female protagonist, but yeah, I definitely get your point there. They are mostly male protagonists, and that's pretty much because that would be the closest to my experience. Um, the state. Am I making so the question is, but by not having the females as a protagonist, am I making a statement about gender relations with that? No, I don't think so.
The the one story with the female protagonist, maybe there's more, but Laramie, I think it's the Tim diet.
Yeah.
That, I mean, a lot of the male characters in this are unsavory figures. And they a lot of them have like complexity to them, so they're not like, there's a lot of gray area, but they've experienced pain or they're inflicting pain on the people in their lives. But with that particular one, like Tim is just 100% bad. Like you're not supposed to feel any, at least I didn't feel any empathy with him there. Do you want to talk about that story and like maybe how the idea for that story came about?
Yeah, the idea for that story. I actually did write that in first person in Laramie's voice to start with. And I decided somewhere along the way that I flipped it to third person, as I will do sometimes, to look at it a different way. And I found I liked that better. I had more possibilities or different possibilities with voice that I liked. And so I tried to do that. So flipped it that way. And then Tim is like a composite of just, yeah, terrible people. I think, yeah, I didn't expect. I didn't want anyone to have any sympathy for him.
Yeah.
But I think with this story, I sat down. This is one of those stories where I sat down every day for like a week and would write 500 words at a time, and then come back to it every day and just, I didn't write too much. I wanted to take time with it, and it came out almost fully formed that way. And something about, you know the female protagonist who's completely in danger
Mhm.
and not completely recognizing it, and then this sort of gift of a like another kind of mother relationship that's across the street. And it also kind of felt like a bit of a fairy tale to me,
Hmm.
um, in this way. And I think I sort of embraced that. And so Tim's definitely, uh, the worst. As I was like, my father read the story, and he brought it up, and I was like, yeah, Tim's not a good guy, and he's like, he's the worst. He like had some feelings against it, and so I like that. I like that it gets a strong reaction. And I mean, I'll be honest. When I was a kid, I loved villains. Like Darth Vader
Mm.
was my favorite. There's a picture of me, and 5 years old, in a kindergarten picture, and there's a little in my fist. You can see this little plastic black thing, and that's Darth Vader's helmet.
Oh
I'm
my gosh.
holding the action figure in my fist. So
Or
yeah,
your teacher's like, wow, why do you like Darth Vader so much?
just villains are kind of fun to write. It's
They're more interesting a lot of times than like the hero who's, 100% good and pure.
yeah.
At least I think they're interesting to read from that perspective. And you and I have talked about this on the Arts Hour about an unlikable protagonist and how like I love an unlikable protagonist. Like I love TV shows even with them like Succession, where like you kind of hate them but you're rooting for them and it makes you feel weird about yourself, and because you're like, why am I rooting for this person that is like a terrible person? But I think it's an interesting moral quandary there.
I think that's probably a common experience. I mean, otherwise, why would people watch reality shows where everyone's acting terribly all the time? And I think you watch these people to see see them do things that you would not do
Hmm.
from a distance. You're not involved in it.
Or you can feel like superior somehow. I think that's a lot of the reality TV show, but
Okay.
I don't know. Who knows? Well,
Probably right.
Elise has a question as your experience as a teacher. Now that your students can read your stories in this collection, do you find your own writing style tends to veer toward their writing style tends to veer toward yours? And if so, how do you fight against that?
Well, it's been out. So this came out in April, and so I've my writing students. I only teach that class in the fall, and I've that I see no effect at all. And like I don't expect. I doubt they've read any of my stories.
You don't think they're like Googling you or anything?
I, I don't know. I have no idea. They haven't said anything, and I do, so I guess I'm not seeing any effect from it, if they are.
Yeah.
So that's okay. And I
That's
don't.
probably a good thing that they're just embracing their own voice.
I encourage them to. I encourage them to write in whatever genre they want to. So that's so because there's common qualities and good writing across all that. So I think they feel that they're not copying what I'm doing at all. I don't think.
Grace Ann says Tim Diet was such a fever dream and chilling. The image of Laramie tanning with the People magazine in the yard was so sick. Oh my God. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is kind of sick. I agree. Hey, Grace Ann.
Charla says, I would love to have any tidbits you want to share about your fun playlist. Pointer Sisters.
Oh,
Smiley face, not frowning.
yeah, that's the only probably the only pop song on there. So those are, so I made a playlist. This is on the Rooted Substack, and also on, I guess, signing up for this StreamYard.
Mhm.
I made a playlist of songs that are or they're either mentioned. The song titles are either mentioned in the book, or they are alluded to, or like an artist is alluded to. And I included, it's about, I don't know, it's 15 songs or something like that. And so it's a playlist, and it was kind of fun making that, to hear how they sort of crash against each other. And
Yeah.
because they're vastly different genres and kinds of songs on the list. But that's kind of, it fits, because I listen to all kinds of things, and that sort of, it reflects that. And there's a lot of music mentioned in the book too. So I think I made that originally when the book was coming out, and I thought, oh, I'll post this, and then I didn't. And then you asked
Oh,
me.
you had saved it. So you had already had one. Okay, I wasn't
I
sure
already
if you
had one.
created one.
And then
Okay.
you asked me about it, and I was like, yeah, I got a playlist. Forgot about that.
Yeah, it was really fun to hear how different it was. I was like, man, there are a lot of different genres of music that these characters are listening to. It's just fun to think about. Uh,
Yeah.
Bill Merkley, he writes, were these stories written relatively close together? I ask because there are some older stories of yours that would have been good to see here.
Oh, hey, Bill, how are you doing? Good. So it's awesome that you're here. So Bill's read a bunch of my stories that are
Oh,
in
cool.
his collection. So were these stories written relatively close together? No, some of them are older, but I finished them all, I would say, in the last couple of years, because I just got to where I'm better at revising things. And a lot of the really shorter stories, like the flash fiction, I didn't think really worked in this collection. So I just didn't include them. These are pretty, for the most part, these are short stories. They're not, I think the shortest one is probably Black Balloons, or or Last Year's Man. But so the answer to your question, no, they weren't written close together. They were started. I mean, some of them are, like the title. The title story was started 20 years ago.
Wow. Yeah.
And so no, and so I have written other ones, since then, but they're not in here.
But I do feel like since you finished editing them together in the last couple of years, it feels very cohesive. I mean, there's a lot of diversity in it, but like they do really feel like they fit together as a collection. So,
Oh, I'm glad. Yeah.
yeah, definitely. Elise says you're so skilled at writing in the short story format. So, are you pretty much committed to staying with stories, or do you think you have a novel in your future or creative nonfiction?
I've got a novel that's pretty much finished. That and to your point, it's hard for me to write a novel, because I'm pretty succinct, I think, in general. I like doing this. I was like, how can I just not have really short answers to everything that Lauren asked me?
We'll
So
just keep asking you more questions.
so yeah, you plan for this, but I'm not gifted with the talking at length, and so I think it's not something that comes naturally to me. I think, and some people are very good at it. I've seen them. We've all seen them. So I think the short story format, I enjoy it. I'm not completely committed to it. It's difficult, I would say, writing in general, in that I keep going back to them, and I get to a point where I'm obsessive with the short stories, I think. But that seems to be
And
what it takes.
obsessive in like revising them, or
Yes.
okay.
Yeah, I think so. Um, so yeah, but I'm not against other forms for sure.
Yeah, I wondered about like if there were characters in some of your short stories that like you couldn't stop thinking of, that you wanted to revisit in another story, or someone who was like a side character maybe having more of their own story. Has that ever happened to you? Or once you're done, you're pretty much like, okay, goodbye.
No, I mean, I've thought about it. I guess I've thought about Billy, which is the story I just read from. Thought about him before in other contexts too, but I don't know.
Yeah, like what happens to him? I want to
Yeah,
know.
yeah. Seems like he might make it. I don't know.
Yeah, I hope he does. Alex writes, is there a story that got left out that you really wanted to be included, and if so, why?
No, with this, I was able to pretty much choose what I wanted. So there's no one was telling me to take anything out, and so I think to me that's one of the pleasures of having it's on an independent press, and you've got a little more power, I think, towards these deciding what goes in there.
Yeah, and the fact that there's like the title story is very long and longer than all the other stories. I thought that was a really cool experience, but I don't know how a big five, they might have been like, no, you can't include that, or they
Right.
just they're more dictatorial about that sort of thing. Can you talk about your publishing journey and how you found this press, how you decided to work with them, and what that was like?
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely. I probably have done this all backwards because all of these, I was sending out short stories and getting tons of rejections and getting a few acceptances and things like that for a long time. And so most of these stories were just living on my laptop, as many of them still are. But my friends Tim and Susan Lee, they started a small press called Cool Dog Sound, and they put out a friend of mine's book, Tyler Keith, who has a noir novel called The Mark of Cain, and they put his out, and they are both artists. Tim was he and his wife. They both have a band right now called Bark, who is they're acclaimed, and they have I think they won the Mississippi Arts and Letters Award for one of their albums, and they're longtime Mississippians. And Tim just said, "Hey, I like your stories. Would you be interested in putting out a book with us?" And I said, "Yeah, absolutely." And I thought about it. I was like, "Well, let me see if I have a book." And I decided, yeah, I do have a book. And so we had a handshake agreement, not an argument yet. We'll have an argument later. But it meant something to me to have these Mississippi artists who I greatly respect. As Bill's pointing out, yes, Tim, the Windbreakers, he founded the Windbreakers, which is a great Oxford band. I mean, Jackson, Mississippi band. And so I never sent this to an agent. I never did that. I just decided, hey, they'll put this out in a year rather than 2 years or more. It won't have to be couched with a novel to be accepted somewhere else, and I will have control over it and be able to make suggestions towards the art and that kind of thing. And so, because Susan Lee, Tim's wife, is a graphic designer, she designs album covers, she designs stuff for Living Blues magazine and other magazines. And so it was a pleasure working with them. They're great people. And to me, that was important because I figured this book would probably be with a small press anyway. So people that I know from the state I'm in, I thought that was a good thing. It seemed to fit me.
Yeah, that you trust and know will do a good job. Elise commented on this too, the cover, and she says, "I love the cover. Was that your choice for the publishers?" I also really love the cover.
Yeah.
Was that Susan that designed it?
She did. I described the image basically, and she made it happen. Made it look. I said I like I like it when it looks like a woodcut, and
yeah.
And so we worked together on that, and it was nice. It was great and really easy, and she's great, and I like it too. I'm glad it's working.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. Well, switching gears a little bit, I'll read some more questions. This is Chris. He says, I enjoyed your stories, but wondered why there was so little hope in any of them. When you imagined the collection, did you consciously decide to emphasize darkness and what felt like failure?
Yeah. Well, I think I don't look at them as I don't look at this as like an argument or some kind of tension between hope and darkness, but I do think that a lot of the books that I really love, they look at some of these dark themes head on and really find people persevering through them and kind of, in some way, I feel like as a reader, I am also learning through this darkness. Right? It's not. I don't look at this as these stories as hopeless, but I see people. What I see is characters that I care about, sort of persevering in spite of this. And
Mm-hmm.
while there aren't really happy endings that I'm working with here, um, I think that there's a lot more going on as well. It's not just about really these are happy or sad themes. I mean, I've got a lot of I like stories that are funny and sad.
Yeah.
So
There's a lot of humor in these too.
I tend to yeah, I feel like I'm sort of working in that sort of vein, and that's what's interesting to me. And so I yeah, I don't look at these characters as failures either, although there are some people who are not doing their best, right?
Mm-hmm. Oftentimes I feel like the character is like presented with options and you can like see you're like, no, go that way and things will get better. And they just like they do what you don't want them to do, but like what makes the story more interesting too. And so like I'm thinking of the title story and uh Clay's, ping ponging between Audrey and Cindy and Hardy Knoll. So it's like he's presented with very clear options and he chooses interesting ones that make you want to follow along.
Yeah, the people making horrible choices. Yeah, sometimes you can't turn away.
But I mean, it's also relatable too. Like we've all made horrible choices
No,
that
yeah,
we regret. So I could not stop reading that story. I think because the short like vignettes, it does feel like flash fiction, and you just kind of like have to keep reading to find out what's next. Grace Ann says, "No, don't cheat with Hardy Knoll again." Um, that's another one of those names that,
yeah,
like, where did that name come from?
yeah. I have a straight. Kind of have I do pay attention to names because my name
Mm-hmm.
is Max Hipp. I have to pay attention to names
Yep.
because I remember being a kid and the teacher's like, Max Hipp, that's a really really appropriate name, or something. There's always a comment, and so you think about it, like when someone's named, whatever their name, they have a very different experience if their name is Jim Jefferson or something. That's a different experience than uh, I don't know. I can't think of a really great name. Your name is, I don't know, George Victory or something like that. It's a different experience, overall. So I think it helps characterize a little bit, helps me to think about think about the characters. And sometimes, but for that one in particular, I just threw that one out there and it stuck. And so that was like a first draft kind of name that I never changed. And
Oh, that's cool when that happens.
she was always Hardy Knoll.
Yeah, and he said, I'll beat up her father if I ever meet him for naming her that. Um,
Yeah. So he
and
cares.
yeah, Chris says your names are great. They remind me of those in Thomas Pynchon's novels. Um,
Thank you.
Alex writes, can you talk more about the final story with the clown? I really loved it, was haunted by it. It was amazing. What was the inspiration?
Yeah, that's a really there's actually a good story behind that story, because a friend of mine who's a wonderful writer, she writes by the name of Casey Mead Brewer, was editing for this journal called 7 by 7, and she asked if, and so this journal was a place where they pair you with a visual artist and you write. And what would happen, it's called 7 by 7 because you're supposed to have each, the writer and the artist will have 7 pages or panels.
Mm.
And what the idea is, every day, it's sort of like like a Dadaist game or something. Like every day, for instance, with this story, the visual artist was this guy based in Ireland,
Mm.
and he sent me a picture of a bottle, and I said, okay, well, I'm going to respond. Had to respond to that in basically 250 words, which is a page.
Oh,
And then I
wow.
wrote that to him. The next day, after I wrote and sent it to him, he would send me another image, and we went like that. And I wrote that story responding to the images. And what winds up happening is you start anticipating each other's moves. And so, but within in 2 weeks, it's done. And the idea is that you write this work out of, that did not exist before. You write it in 2 weeks in a collaborative thing. And then it goes up on the website eventually. And so it's on 7 by 7, and you can
Oh,
see the
cool.
images there with I'm paired with this artist. If you just put my name in Google with 7 by 7, I'm sure it would come up.
I'm going to have to check that out. That's such a cool concept.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was fun. And, I'd been thinking a little bit about clowns. So that,
So
like,
he didn't start with an image of the clown. I mean, it was a bottle, so you already had kind of a clown image in mind.
yeah, yes, apparently.
Yeah.
And I've been thinking, was like, there's different kinds of clowns. Like, what makes a different kind of clown makeup? What are they called? And so just that kind of thing I was thinking about at the time.
Well, he's kind of like I mean, it's a grief clown.
Yeah. Yeah. He's a grief
Yeah,
clown. He's a hobo clown.
a hobo
He's a
clown.
very
And
specific.
you must have researched like the terms, like you have I don't know, there was like some specific vocabulary that I was like, oh, I didn't know the term for that. Now I'm forgetting it. But
Yeah.
yeah,
The Bindle.
the bindle. Yes, yes. Grace Ann also says she loves that, and him fighting the clown made me LOL. It was perfect. So we have a lot of fans of that story. Why did you place that story at the very end?
Um, why did I place that story at the very end? Well, I felt like after the novella length thing, it was nice to have a kind of falling. I don't know. It felt right in the rhythm of the stories, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And just because it was shorter, and I liked the action of he's basically leaving town at the end. It made a kind of sense to me, like in like movement, I guess.
Yeah, it did feel right. It almost felt like an epilogue in a way, like just like that little piece you need at the end. And it felt very like allegorical, almost like a fable,
Yeah.
and I enjoyed that as well. Um, I also wanted to ask you about SBG, Southern Baptist God, and just the role of Christianity in these stories was really interesting. A lot of the characters are not, I would say they're not churchgoers, or they go because they feel like they have to at that point in their life. But they're very influenced by like the idea of God, or like rejecting it, rejecting religion. How did you how did you conceive of like religion infusing these stories? And maybe we can start with Clay and SBG.
Yeah, SBG, so Southern Baptist God. That Clay has a very specific um, uh, relationship with that, because kind of he grew up in a church culture, but he doesn't feel a part of it, and so that creates, he already has that sort of antagonistic, I don't know, idea towards Christianity. But it's not just Christianity. It's more like hypocrisy. It's more
Mm,
that kind of idea. And when it becomes an issue with his wife, and leads to them, of course, having problems, and because he cannot embrace it in the way that everyone around him seems to, because he feels outside of it for
yeah.
whatever reason, and that somehow it hasn't been very inclusive. The Southern Baptists around him have not been inclusive.
Yeah, but I'll just read the first couple lines because I really liked it. He said, "In the gravel lot, I decided I deserved this. Southern Baptist God, or SBG for short, had willed it." So it's not that he's rejecting the idea of SBG. It's like there's this kind of antagonistic, almost like vengeful aspect that he puts onto SBG that
Yeah, that's
I found
true.
interesting. It's like almost like Old Testament God is like enacting vengeance on him.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and then there's other characters too. I mean, Billy, uh, he meets up with the man who got into a car wreck with him, who's kind of like a born again guy.
Hmm.
Did you kind of always envision that for that character?
For the car wreck, the guy hit
Yeah.
Hopkins. Yeah, Hopkins was always going to be that character, um, who was born again, and just uh, sort of. That he's the character that is in opposition to Billy, because Billy just thinks he thinks it's nonsense completely to be able to say, "Hey, I'm a different person now," and all I had to
Mhm.
do was, I said I did this thing. So he again is sort of thinks of it as hypocrisy, and sees it as, um, Hopkins is putting on a show, and maybe he's right, kind of right.
Yeah.
Um, but they both kind of share their alcoholism, so they
Yeah,
connect.
they're still connected in a way that they can't escape from one another.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Well, I kind of am curious about, since you're a musician and a writer, how do you balance both of those things and, making music, writing? Do they kind of like feed into each other, or do you have to set aside time for each pursuit?
Yeah, I have to set aside time for each one, and I used to write a lot more songs, but I wasn't writing as much fiction then, and so now I write fewer songs, and it's fine. So they are kind of, they're all coming from a similar creative place, but yeah, it's a different mindset to get into um, to write each one, because I mean, with a song, you can respond. You're responding to music. You're putting lyrics over that, and with fiction, or just the written word. You're kind of, the music has to be within the prose, and so yeah, I think I have to prepare myself differently for it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Elise, thank you so much. I must have missed your question. Whether Max imagines any of these stories existing in the same world. So some story collections do have that kind of overlap. Do you imagine these characters existing together?
Yeah, yeah, I do. I think they absolutely can exist in the same world. There's different timeline. I mean, some of them are taking place in different points. Like the one that's one that's based around Jackson that's taking place 30 years ago. So, but yeah, it's the same world. It might be different time periods.
But it's kind of the world I imagine it as like Oxford and Jackson, and in between. I mean, there's Athens, Georgia too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's all southern states though for sure.
it's a very Southern Gothic collection, which I love that about it. Yeah, can we talk about that story that takes place in Jackson? Are you thinking of Cliff Burton Rules? Is that the one that you were
Oh, that's
referring
true.
to?
There's two. Yeah, there's two different ones
Oh,
taking place around Jackson. Like the Disciples of Suede is also that's the one that's taking place out across the spillway.
yeah. Well, Suede and the Swedes. I had to make a note of that because I thought that was a great band name. But yeah, can you talk about that character of Suede? Did you know anybody like that growing up? Like that character felt very real.
I like the idea of this teenager who's completely great. He's great at sports. He's great at anything, and so much value is placed on it. And then he gains all this notoriety, and then he doesn't want it. He decides this is empty and it's not sustainable, and I'm not into it. And my parents love it, and so I liked that kind of character, somebody who kind of lets go of these things that he kind of outgrows quickly, literally, which I thought was I don't know. And I like he was a good contrast for me. I like the narrator. The narrator is very different than Suede.
Yes.
And idolizes him. So I thought that, yeah, I like that juxtaposing those two.
Yeah, and it's told through the kind of the sidekick's eyes, which is always an interesting perspective. Charla says that was my favorite story, Disciples of Suede. Convinced Suede is my husband's cousin. Soccer at Northwest Rankin in the late 80s. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I just thought it was interesting how, the protagonist is so in love with Suede's mother and then runs into her at North Park Mall. And she's so different than the person that he remembers. And that just felt very real to me, of like going back and seeing someone or something that like you had this understanding of them when you were a kid, and they're sort of diminished when you like go back as an adult.
Yeah. To me, that character is also not very nice. He's not a very nice person.
No, he's not.
He's very judgmental, and he's got a lot to learn still. But I don't know. He might wind up okay in the end.
I feel like I've met some of him as well around town. Unfortunately. Yeah, well, is there any other I'd love for folks to also say what other stories in the chat, if there was another story that you liked or resonated with you. The one that made me ask you about the playlist was Death May Be Your Santa Claus, which is the only title I think that takes its name from a song title. How did that song make its way into the story?
Yeah. I just liked the song. I liked that album. It's a way of when I'm writing something, I find if I can kind of latch on to some part of it, if there's some detail that I agree with, or I feel like this is good, and I'll put it in. It helps the story feel alive for me, and I can keep going back to it that way. So I like that band. I think they're interesting and good. And that song is strange. It's a really strange song, and I thought it fit also fit the Suzanne.
Yeah, he's kind of haunted by the name and trying to remember these details about her. So you kind of conceive of like characters and like envisioning their musical taste and what that might say about them.
That's right.
Do you ever like make a playlist for a character?
I don't normally do that. That's something I've thought about doing maybe in the future. I'd like to have a little bit more scaffolding for a character or something. I could see where that might help. I've just been, usually I'm just going in with nothing and adding stuff.
Building it as you go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I have a friend who makes Pinterest boards for characters to kind of like envision them as a way of procrastinating, but productively procrastinating, which I think it sounds really fun.
That does sound good.
Yeah, well, I also love the story Cliff Burton rules, and and we can talk about Bill's question next. But you and I talked about this on the Arts Hour, the fact that you were also a teenage metalhead, Mississippi metalhead, like the protagonist in this book or in this story. And I actually really love this story. I found the protagonist very sympathetic. I wanted him to get out of Taco Hell and make his way in the world. This is one of I guess there's those two stories told from a teenager's perspective. What made you want to go back to this character?
Yeah. What made me want to go to that character? I also, I think teenage protagonists are very compelling. It's such a time when everything is so meaningful and you're so full of these, hormones, and you're kind of insane. And when you're trying to just figure out what the hell's wrong with the adults, and it's tough. It's hard. And so there's immediately a lot at stake for that character. And I like that character also because he's a zealot. He's very ideological about metal. There's no other music. There's nothing else but this. This is the thing he's going to do. And and I remember being like that, and everyone else I hung out with was kind of like that. We were just very, this is the greatest. You must love this. And if you don't love this, you're not with us. And so it was these very clear, pretty arbitrary lines drawn. But so I don't know. That's funny to me to go back to as well.
Yeah, and that's very teenagers. I mean, you kind of have that group, and you have to kind of all conform and have your identity together. I think that's a very like mark of high school and that time period. There's a sentence that I love on the VHS tape. Metallica slays at Day on the Green in San Francisco, a town that might as well be the lost city of Atlantis to us Mississippi metalheads. Taco Hell is my gateway to the Tower of Metal, I say, high enough to be struck by the truth. I thought that was great.
Oh. Yeah, you had to get in the right mindset to write those metal lyrics, you see.
Yep. He's living the metal lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
Bill asks, do you write with music on?
I've tried, and I think it mostly doesn't work well. But if I can get anything done with music on it, it would be instrumental music, I guess. And sometimes that'll work, but for the most part, sadly, I cannot. I would say no.
Do you feel that's because you're like dissecting the music and like trying to listen to it rather than just kind of like tune out?
Yes, it's hard for me to turn off that, sort of, I guess, attention to it. Mm-hmm. Like I will pay attention to it, and in a way that's it. So maybe I just haven't found the right background music, I guess, that's uninteresting to me. But then why are you listening to it?
Right. So, I can't write with music on either. No. I don't know. Bill, are you a writer?
Yes.
Okay.
Great writer.
Okay. Do you write with music, Bill? I'm just curious. And Grace Ann says, 2-part question. Can you talk more about your writing process? do you have any specific rituals or exercises? And secondly, do you relate to any of the self-destructive or apathetic, stagnant behaviors of your characters? And if so, how do you counter this and put pen to paper?
Wow, those are great questions. Okay,
Give us some wisdom.
yeah, I'll try to conjure some. So, writing process, it is with a lot of these stories in the collection, I would write until I had some kind of draft and then forget about it for a while and work on other things and then come back to the thing I forgot about and work on it some more and then move on and keep doing that, which I don't recommend this process, by the way. I'm just telling you how I was doing things. And, doing that, it made me, the point is I would come back to it with fresh eyes. I'm seeing things new. And by the time I came back, I might have some idea about how to change things or continue it. But also in this process, what's instrumental is other readers looking at it, telling you what they see. Because if they're seeing something completely different than what you intended, that's something to note. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's not clear maybe what you think you're writing is not as clear as it could be. So my process, I guess, is working and then forgetting and then coming back. And so after I've forgotten about the story enough to look at it new, then I come back to it. Any specific rituals or exercises? It's different. Like, I think I approach different kinds of writing different ways. Like flash fiction, I'm more likely to use a prompt. Say a good prompt would be pick 5 objects and include all 5 in the story somehow. And so then you're focused on these objects and trying to weave a story out of this, which might get interesting results out of that.
Yeah.
Rituals, I don't have a ritual other than coffee, and I think that's pretty boring, and everyone probably already does something like that. And let's see. Secondly, do you relate to any of the self-destructive, apathetic, stagnant behaviors of your characters? And if so, how do you counter this and put pen to paper? I do relate to some of them. And how do I counter this? So how do I step outside of my own stagnant behaviors of not writing or not or
that's how I interpret it.
Yeah, that's a constant. That it would be that's a sort of struggle. I think it's learning how to use your own nervous system better. And so I don't know. So how about that? I have an answer for this. Meditation, and maybe, I don't know. I've had good luck with counseling. It might be too much information, but yeah, absolutely.
No, I think that's a good answer. Do you write at certain times of day or evening?
I'll write in the morning. Generally, and at night I never write. So I'll write in the morning and I guess the afternoon at times.
Is that the same times when you would like write music or practice music?
I'm more likely to do music at night.
Okay, interesting. That seems very complimentary.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, but then it's, I don't normally do it in the same day though. It's interesting. I don't know. I haven't thought about it that way.
Well, Bill, I do have to follow up with Bill. Yeah, you only listen to Miles Davis. I think that's a pretty great choice.
Yeah, I think so too. I don't know. I wish I could listen to Miles Davis. I think it's too distracting for me. Too interesting.
Too much going on.
Too much going on.
Well, Max, thank you so much for talking about this wonderful collection, What Doesn't Kill You Opens Your Heart. I loved it. I've recommended it to everyone, and thank you for coming on tonight.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been so much fun, and thanks everybody for hanging out and asking these great questions, and hope to see you soon.
And I cannot forget to say the next book. So our next book club we're doing something a little different to kick off 2025. So on January 23rd, we're going to be doing a book club meeting in person. and it's actually going to be at the Mississippi Museum of Art. It's inspired by their new exhibit of salt and spirit Black quilters in the American South, which if you haven't seen that exhibit, it's amazing. So this will be a very good excuse to go. And we'll be reading Alice Walker's In Search of Our Mother's Gardens. And they're going to be doing like a guided tour of the exhibit, and then we'll be doing the book club discussion. So unfortunately, it will only be available to local folks or people who want to drive in. But I'm very excited about that event. So Max, if you're around, please come.
That sounds amazing. I want to come to that for sure.
I think it'll be fun. But thank you, Max. Thank you, everybody, for being here and asking wonderful questions tonight. And Shira says, we've got merch. We do. Just go to rooted.substack.com, find our merch. So thank you, Shira. All right. Have a great night, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, Max. Bye.